I woke to the sound of machines changing rhythm. The steady beeping that had become my lullaby over the past 3 months suddenly accelerated, then stuttered into an irregular pattern that made my heart stop completely. My hand tightened around his before I could think. The platinum ring on my finger caught the dim light from the medical equipment, heavy and cold against my skin. Valentina's ring. My sister's ring. The lie I'd been wearing for 92 days straight. The digital clock on the wall read 4:23 a.m. I'd been dozing in the chair beside Lorenzo Ricci's hospital bed, my neck stiff from the awkward angle, my body exhausted from another night of keeping vigil over a man I barely knew. A man I was pretending to love. A man whose real fiancé was buried in a cemetery across town. Lorenzo's fingers twitched against mine. Just a small movement, barely perceptible, but after months of stillness it felt monumental. My breath caught in my throat as his eyelids flickered. "Nurse!" I called out, my voice cracking from disuse. "Someone get the doctor." The night shift nurse rushed in, her sensible shoes squeaking against the sterile floor. She moved with practiced efficiency, checking monitors and adjusting equipment while I sat frozen, unable to let go of his hand, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. This was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment when Lorenzo Ricci would wake up, and I'd have to look into his eyes and continue the most elaborate lie of my life. Dr. Patel entered next, followed by 2 other medical professionals whose names I'd learned but couldn't recall through my panic. They swarmed around the bed, their movements coordinated and calm in a way that made my own racing heartbeat feel even more chaotic. "Mr. Ricci, can you hear me?" Dr. Patel's voice was clear and authoritative. "If you can hear me, squeeze the hand you're holding." Lorenzo's fingers pressed against mine. The sensation traveled up my arm like electricity, equal parts relief and terror. "Good. That's very good." Dr. Patel continued his examination, shining a light into Lorenzo's eyes, asking questions that received no verbal response but small physical acknowledgments. Finger squeezes, slight head movements, the basic building blocks of consciousness returning after 3 months of darkness. I wanted to pull away, to give the medical team space to work, but Lorenzo's grip on my hand tightened whenever I tried to shift, even unconscious, even barely awake. Some part of him recognized the presence beside him and refused to let go. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Dr. Patel stepped back. "He's coming out of it. The next few hours will be critical. We'll need to monitor him closely, but this is the best sign we've had since the accident. The accident. The sanitized word for the ambush that had killed my sister and nearly killed the man in this bed. The event that had shattered multiple lives and rebuilt mine into this precarious house of cards." Dr. Patel left to update his charts and alert the Ricci family. The nurses adjusted equipment one final time before retreating to give us privacy. And then it was just me and Lorenzo in the quiet pre-dawn darkness, his hand still holding mine, his chest rising and falling with increasing steadiness. His eyes opened slowly, struggling against the weight of medication and trauma. The color was exactly as I remembered from the photos I'd studied obsessively. Dark brown, nearly black in this lighting, with a depth that suggested intelligence and calculation. Eyes that had looked at my sister with love. Eyes that would look at me now expecting to see her. His lips moved, forming sounds that didn't quite become words. I leaned closer, my heart hammering so hard I wondered if he could hear it. "Val." The name emerged as barely more than a whisper, rough from months of disuse. The name that wasn't mine. The identity I'd stolen. The sister I'd buried. "I'm here," I said, because what else could I say? The lie had already been told. The family had made their choice, and I'd agreed to it because I'd been desperate, grieving, and convinced it would only be temporary. Just until he wakes up, they'd said. Just until he's stable. Just until he can handle the truth. But looking at him now, at the confusion and pain and desperate hope in those dark eyes, I realized the truth might destroy him more thoroughly than any physical injury. His eyes closed again, consciousness slipping away as quickly as it had come, but his hand remained tight around mine, an anchor in whatever darkness still pulled at him. The door burst open, and Isabetta Ricci rushed in, her elegant silk robe barely concealing the pajamas underneath, her carefully maintained composure shattered by 3 months of waiting and praying. At 56, she was still beautiful in that effortless way wealthy women achieved through good genetics and better skincare. Her dark hair only lightly threaded with gray, her face lined with worry but not yet age. Is he? She couldn't finish the question, her hand pressed to her mouth as she stared at her son. He opened his eyes, I said, standing to give her access to the bedside. He said, I hesitated, swallowing the guilt. He said my name. Isabetta's eyes filled with tears. She reached for me, pulling me into an embrace that felt both genuine and suffocating. Thank God. Thank God you were here. Thank God you stayed. I'd stayed because they'd asked me to. Because Valentina's body was barely cold when Isabetta had shown up at my tiny apartment with wet eyes and desperate hands, explaining that Lorenzo needed stability to survive, that the shock of losing his fiancée on top of his injuries might kill him, that I looked exactly like Valentina, and could I please just pretend for a little while, just until he's stronger, she'd said. Just until he can handle the truth, she'd said. Just this once, she'd said. But once had turned into days, then weeks, then months, and now here I stood, wearing my dead sister's ring and accepting congratulations for a vigil I'd kept under false pretenses. You saved him, Isabetta whispered against my hair. By being here, by giving him something to fight for, you saved my son. The words should have felt like absolution. Instead, they felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Over the next 5 days, the hospital room became a revolving door of medical professionals, family members, and quiet moments where I sat alone with Lorenzo, watching him drift in and out of consciousness like someone learning to swim in shallow water. The neurologist confirmed no major brain damage. The physical therapist outlined an aggressive rehabilitation program. The psychiatrist suggested that memory issues and disorientation were normal after prolonged coma and would likely resolve with time. No one mentioned that sometimes people forget entire relationships. No one warned that he might not remember my sister clearly. No one prepared me for the possibility that my deception might work because Lorenzo's own mind was helping me lie. I wore the wine-colored uniform of a private nurse over my deception, a costume that gave me purpose and distance simultaneously. The hospital staff assumed I was family. The Ricci family knew better but played along, and Lorenzo, when he was conscious, simply accepted my presence the way someone might accept sunrise. Expected, natural, unquestioned. Anthony Ricci appeared on the second day, taking up residence in the corner of the room like a well-dressed shadow. At 32, he'd aged faster than his younger brother, the weight of helping run the family business, etching lines around his eyes and mouth that no amount of expensive grooming could erase. His light brown hair was carefully styled, his blue eyes sharp and assessing in a way that made me want to hide. He watched me, not obviously, not threateningly, but with the steady attention of someone conducting an inventory, checking boxes, looking for discrepancies. You're holding up well, he commented on the third day, his voice neutral as he sipped espresso from a cup that probably cost more than my rent. I'm doing what anyone would do, I replied, adjusting Lorenzo's blanket with hands that had learned to be careful around medical equipment. Most people would have left by now. His eyes tracked my movements. The shock, the trauma, the uncertainty. Most people wouldn't sit vigil for 3 months beside a hospital bed. My throat tightened. Was this a test? Did he suspect? I love him, I said, and the lie tasted like ash. Anthony nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested he was filing the conversation away for later examination. Valentina always was devoted, even when things were difficult. I didn't know what things he meant. I didn't know the intimate details of my sister's relationship with Lorenzo, beyond what I'd gleaned from letters and photos and careful questioning of Isabetta. Every conversation was a minefield where one wrong step could expose everything. On the 5th night, everything changed. I was alone with Lorenzo when his eyes opened with a clarity that hadn't been there before. The hazy confusion of the previous days had burned away, leaving behind focused intelligence that made my stomach clench with fear. Valentina. His voice was stronger now, rough but functional. His hand found mine on the bed rail. You're really here. I'm really here, I confirmed, sitting in the chair I'd worn smooth over months of waiting. He studied my face with an intensity that felt like physical touch, his dark eyes moving over features that matched his memory. I'd been grateful, in a sick way, that Valentina and I had been identical twins. Different haircuts, different personalities, but the same face down to the placement of freckles and the curve of our lips. "What happened?" he asked. I remember pieces, glass, screaming, pain, but it's all fragmented. This was the story Isabetta and I had rehearsed, the official version that explained his injuries without revealing that Valentina had died beside him. "There was an ambush," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. "We were at dinner at our favorite restaurant downtown. The triad hit the car on the way home. You protected me. You pushed me down when the shooting started." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath skin that had lost weight during his coma, but still held the structure of a strong man. "And you? Were you hurt?" "Minor injuries," I said, which was true for me but would have been a lie for Valentina. "Nothing serious. I was lucky." "Lucky," he repeated, and something dark crossed his expression. "We were attacked, and you call it lucky." "We survived," I amended. "That's what matters." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, a gesture that should have felt intimate but instead felt like he was testing the shape of my bones, confirming my reality. "How long?" 3 months, 1 week, and 4 days. He closed his eyes, processing. When he opened them again, there were tears gathering at the corners. "You stayed. Through all of it, you stayed. Where else would I be? Most people," he swallowed hard, "most people would have given up, would have assumed I wasn't coming back." My chest ached with guilt so profound it felt like drowning. This man was thanking me for a devotion that belonged to someone else, crediting me with a love I'd never earned. "You're worth waiting for," I said. And at least that part felt honest. Anyone who'd endured what he'd endured deserved someone's faith. We sat in silence for several minutes, his hand holding mine, both of us processing this new reality. Lorenzo was awake. The temporary deception I'd agreed to was about to become an active daily performance, and I had no idea how long I could maintain it before the weight of the lie crushed us both. "I need to tell the family," I said finally. "Your mother has been waiting to hear your voice." "Wait," his grip tightened. "Just give me a minute more. With you, before everyone else comes and it becomes chaos." So I stayed. And in that quiet moment before dawn fully broke, I memorized the feel of his hand around mine, the sound of his breathing, the way he looked at me like I was his entire world. Because soon, when he was stronger, when his memories were clearer, when the truth finally emerged, all of this would shatter, and I would be the one holding the pieces of something I'd helped destroy. On the 8th day after Lorenzo woke, Isabetta found me in the hallway outside his room. The private wing of the hospital was quiet, expensive, designed for families who could afford privacy alongside their suffering. She touched my shoulder gently, her fingers cold even through my uniform. "You're doing the right thing," she said quietly. "I know this is difficult. I know it's not what you signed up for. But Lorenzo needs this stability to recover properly." I looked at her, this elegant woman who'd orchestrated an elaborate deception to protect her son, and wondered if she understood the cost. What happens when he remembers? When his memory fully returns? Isabetta's expression flickered with something that might have been doubt before hardening back into resolve. By then he'll be strong. By then he'll be able to handle the truth. But right now, in this fragile state, the shock could set back his recovery by months. Or worse. "You're asking me to build a relationship on lies. I'm asking you to give my son time to heal." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Please, Lucia. For Valentina. Don't you think she'd want her sister to protect the man she loved?" That was the cruelest part of the manipulation. She was probably right. Valentina would have asked me to do exactly this. My sister had loved Lorenzo with a fierce completeness I'd envied from the safe distance of my own lonelier life. She would have moved mountains to protect him. So I was moving them for her. I nodded once, agreeing again to a deception that grew heavier with each passing day. Isabetta squeezed my shoulder in what I supposed was meant as comfort, then returned to her son's room where she could be the concerned mother without the burden of orchestrating lies. I stood alone in the hallway, the ring on my finger catching the harsh hospital lights, and wondered how far into the quicksand I could walk before I lost the ability to pull myself back out. 2 weeks after Lorenzo opened his eyes for the first time, the private medical wing of the Ricci mansion became his personal rehabilitation center. The family had spared no expense, converting an entire section of the East Wing into a state-of-the-art facility, complete with equipment that looked like it belonged in an Olympic training center rather than a private home. I watched from the doorway as Lorenzo attempted to lift a weight that probably weighed less than 5 pounds. His arm shook with the effort, muscles that had once been powerful now atrophied from months of disuse. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the climate-controlled comfort of the room. "Again," the physical therapist commanded, a stern woman named Patricia, who'd been hired specifically because she didn't coddle her patients. 10 more repetitions. Your body remembers how to do this." Lorenzo's jaw clenched as he pushed through another lift. I could see the frustration etched into every line of his face, the rage at his own weakness barely contained beneath a veneer of compliance. This was a man accustomed to control, to power, to bodies that obeyed his commands. Being trapped in flesh that betrayed him at every turn was perhaps worse than the coma itself. When Patricia finally called for a break, Lorenzo's eyes found mine across the room. There was something raw in his gaze, a vulnerability he probably hated anyone witnessing. "You don't have to watch this," he said, his voice rough. "It's not exactly inspiring." "I don't mind," I replied, moving closer. The wine-colored nurse uniform I'd continued wearing gave me an excuse to be present, a professional reason to hover. "You're doing better than you think. I can barely lift a child's toy without shaking. 3 weeks ago you couldn't open your eyes. Progress isn't always dramatic." He studied me for a long moment, and I fought the urge to look away. Valentina wouldn't have looked away. Valentina had been confident, unflinching, the kind of woman who met intensity with her own fire. I was learning to mirror that strength even when my instincts screamed to retreat. "Stay," he said finally. "If you're going to be here, make yourself useful." So I did. Patricia showed me how to support his arm during certain exercises, how to count repetitions, how to adjust his posture when it started to falter. The work was intimate in ways that made me hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. My hands on his shoulder, his breath against my neck when I leaned close to check his form, the heat of his body despite the cool air. We were building something, but it wasn't love. It was a careful architecture of trust constructed on unstable ground, and I knew with sick certainty that when the foundation eventually gave way, the collapse would bury us both. The days settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and dangerous. Mornings began with breakfast in the formal dining room, the Ricci family gathering around a table that could have seated 20, but felt intimate with just the 5 of us. Lorenzo, Isabetta, Anthony, myself, and occasionally Lorenzo's Uncle Vincent, who handled the family's legitimate business interests. I'd memorized details about Valentina's life with obsessive thoroughness, but breakfast conversations still terrified me. Inside jokes I didn't understand. References to events I hadn't attended. The constant fear that someone would mention something specific and expect me to remember details I'd never known. "Do you remember the last time we were all together like this?" Isabetta asked one morning, passing a basket of fresh pastries. "Before the accident, at Anthony's birthday dinner?" My mind went blank. I had no idea what had happened at Anthony's birthday dinner. I didn't know if Valentina had given a speech or gotten drunk or argued with someone. The gap in my knowledge yawned like a chasm. "Feels like a lifetime ago," I said carefully, hoping the vague response would suffice. Lorenzo reached for my hand under the table, squeezing gently. "We're making new memories now. That's what matters." The relief that flooded through me felt like betrayal. He was protecting me from scrutiny without realizing I needed protection. His kindness made the deception worse. Anthony watched the exchange with unreadable eyes. He'd been doing that more frequently, observing interactions with the focus of someone solving a puzzle. I couldn't tell if he suspected something, or if this was simply his nature. The older brother who'd learned to be cautious in a world where trust could be weaponized. Afternoons belonged to physical therapy. Patricia came for the formal sessions, but Lorenzo pushed himself beyond the scheduled hours, determined to reclaim his strength through sheer force of will. and I found myself staying long after Patricia left, helping with exercises that probably didn't require assistance, but gave me a reason to be close to him. During the third week, something in Lorenzo snapped. He'd been attempting to do push-ups, a modified version that Patricia had demonstrated, but his arms gave out halfway through the third repetition. He crashed to the mat with a grunt of frustration that rapidly escalated into rage. Before I could react, he was on his feet and punching the wall with his right hand, the impact echoing through the room like a gunshot. Once, twice, 3 times, each blow powered by fury at his own limitations. "Lorenzo, stop!" I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back before he did serious damage. His knuckles were already bleeding, skin split over bone. He froze at my touch, chest heaving, eyes wild with something that looked dangerously close to despair. For a moment we stood there, his arm tense under my grip, both of us breathing hard. "Let me see," I said quietly, releasing him to examine the damage. His hand trembled as I turned it palm up, blood welling from multiple splits across his knuckles. I guided him to sit on the weight bench and retrieved the first aid kit I'd learned to keep stocked in the therapy room. Gauze, antiseptic, bandages, the supplies of damage control. He watched in silence as I cleaned the wounds with careful efficiency, dabbing away blood with gauze soaked in antiseptic. The alcohol must have stung, but he didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. His eyes tracked my movements with laser focus, cataloging the professional precision of my technique. "You're good at that," he observed. "Too good for someone who's never had medical training." My heart stuttered, but I kept my hands steady. I learned after the accident. I wanted to be prepared in case. I trailed off, letting implication fill the gap. "In case you got hurt again. In case I needed to help you." The lies were becoming easier to tell, which terrified me more than the awkward fumbling had. "Prepared," he repeated, and I couldn't tell if he believed me or was simply choosing to accept the explanation. "You've thought of everything." Someone had to. I wound clean gauze around his knuckles with practiced care, securing it with medical tape. "Your physical therapist would kill me if I let you damage yourself before she could push you properly." The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "My physical therapist is terrifying. She's effective. Same thing in her profession." He flexed his bandaged hand experimentally, testing the wrap. "Thank you for not lecturing me about the stupidity of punching walls." Would it have helped? No. Then why waste both our time? I began repacking the first aid kit, needing something to do with my hands that didn't involve touching him. The intimacy of treating his injury had left me feeling exposed, like I'd revealed something I couldn't name. "Valentina." His voice stopped me mid-motion. I turned to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. Taking care of an invalid, sitting through hours of pathetic attempts at physical therapy, watching me have breakdowns over things that should be simple. You could leave. You have my family's support, access to resources. No one would blame you for needing distance." The offer was genuine. I could hear it in his voice, see it in the careful way he held himself, as if bracing for rejection. And the cruelest part was that Lucia could have left, could have walked away from this elaborate deception and rebuilt her own quiet life. But Valentina, the woman he thought I was, would never abandon him. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and meant it even though the promise bound me more tightly to the lie. "You think this is the hardest thing I've ever done? Lorenzo, I watched machines breathe for you for 3 months. This is nothing." Something in his expression cracked, vulnerability bleeding through the careful control. "I don't deserve you." The words hit like a physical blow. He was right, but not in the way he meant. I was the thing he didn't deserve, the poison disguised as medicine, the betrayal wearing his fiancé's face. "Let's agree to disagree on that," I managed, forcing lightness into my tone. "Now, do you want to try those push-ups again, or should we call it for today?" Again. The determination was back, burning away the momentary weakness. "I'm not ending on failure." So we worked through another set, and then another, until exhaustion finally forced him to admit defeat. But there was satisfaction in that exhaustion, the knowledge that he'd pushed himself to a genuine limit, rather than giving up when it became uncomfortable. The evenings were mine alone, stolen hours after the family retired to their separate wings of the mansion. I'd lock myself in the guest room that had become my prison and my sanctuary, spreading photos and letters across the bed like evidence in an investigation. Valentina smiled up at me from a dozen different moments. At a charity gala, wearing a dress the color of blood, on a beach somewhere tropical, her hair wild with wind and sea spray. Pressed close to Lorenzo in what looked like a restaurant, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. I studied each image like a religious text, memorizing not just her face, but the way she held herself, the tilt of her head when she smiled, the way her hand rested on Lorenzo's arm, casual and possessive, the confidence that radiated from her in waves, the certainty of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. I practiced her laugh in the mirror, the way she threw her head back and let joy escape without restraint. So different from my own quiet amusement, the muted responses I'd learned growing up as the quiet twin, the shadow, the one who took up less space. The videos were harder. Isabella had given me access to her personal collection, dozens of clips from family gatherings and private moments. I watched Valentina navigate these interactions with effortless grace. She touched people when she talked to them, her hand on their shoulder or arm, creating instant intimacy. She wore her nails long and painted them dark red, almost burgundy. She moved through rooms like she owned them, never hesitating, never second-guessing. I trimmed my nails to match hers, and bought 3 bottles of nail polish in slightly different shades of burgundy before finding the exact color. I practiced her gestures until my shoulders ached, forcing myself to reach out and touch invisible people in ways that felt invasive and wrong for someone as introverted as me. I was becoming someone else, shedding my own personality like an ill-fitting coat and wrapping myself in my dead sister's skin. And the most terrifying part was how natural it was starting to feel. On the morning that Isabella appeared with the wedding dress, I was having coffee in the breakfast room, reviewing my mental notes about an upcoming dinner with Lorenzo's business associates. I'd managed to learn the basics: who hated whom, which alliances were fragile, what topics to avoid in polite conversation. Lucia, Isabella's voice made me look up. She stood in the doorway holding a garment bag that looked expensive even covered. I thought, now that Lorenzo is recovering so well, perhaps we could begin thinking about the wedding again. The wedding, the ceremony that Valentina had been planning when she died, the future that was supposed to be hers. My stomach turned to ice. I'm not sure Lorenzo is strong enough for wedding planning yet. Not planning, just reconnecting with the dream. Isabella moved into the room with the careful steps of someone approaching a skittish animal. This is the dress Valentina chose. I thought maybe you'd like to try it on, see if it still fits. We could have it altered if needed. The dress inside the bag was exactly what Valentina would have chosen. Champagne silk with French lace overlay, elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of dress that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. The construction alone probably cost more than I'd earned in the past year, working 2 jobs while Valentina lived her elevated life. It's beautiful, I managed, the words sticking in my throat. Will you try it? Isabella's eyes were hopeful, eager, seeing only the happy ending she'd orchestrated through deception. Just for me. Just to see. I couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. Couldn't explain that putting on my dead sister's wedding dress felt like desecration, like wearing grave clothes stolen from a corpse. So I took the garment bag and retreated to my room with promises to show her later. I hung the bag in the closet and stared at it for 20 minutes before my stomach rebelled completely. I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting, my body rejecting the lie with more honesty than my mouth could manage. The dress stayed in the closet. When Isabella asked later, I told her it brought back too many memories of the accident, too much trauma associated with wedding planning when we'd nearly lost everything. I needed more time. She accepted the explanation with sympathy, storing the dress away without argument. But I caught Anthony in the hallway afterward, his lean frame propped against the wall, in a pose that was too casual to be coincidental. Difficult day? He asked, his blue eyes tracking my movements with uncomfortable precision. The dress was overwhelming, understandable. Trauma changes people, changes how they relate to memories, to objects, to plans they made before everything fell apart. He paused, and something in that pause felt weighted, Sometimes those changes are so profound that the person who emerges isn't quite the same as the person who went in. My pulse kicked up. Was he suggesting something specific, or simply making conversation? I'm still me, I said carefully. Just adjusting. Of course. Anthony pushed off the wall. Just remember that changes need to be monitored, for everyone's safety. That's all I'm saying. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone in the hallway with the sick certainty that he suspected something. Maybe not the full truth, but enough to be watching, enough to be dangerous. That night, everything shifted again. I was helping Lorenzo with his final exercises of the day, supporting his weight as he attempted single-leg balances that tested both strength and coordination. His hand gripped my shoulder for stability, his body pressed close enough that I could feel the heat of exertion radiating from his skin. "That's good," I said, as he held the position for a count of 10. Patricia would be impressed. Patricia is never impressed. I was but there was satisfaction in his voice. The pleasure of measurable progress. When he finally lowered his foot back to the ground, he didn't immediately release his grip on my shoulder. We stood there in the quiet therapy room, closer than necessary, his breathing still elevated from the exercise. Lucia. He rarely used my first name, usually opting for pet names or nothing at all. Hearing it now felt significant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do I seem different to you?" "Since waking up?" The question caught me off guard. "Different how?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." His hand slid from my shoulder but didn't go far, settling at the curve of my waist instead. "The doctors say some memory issues are normal, that certain details might be hazy, but it feels like more than that sometimes. Like I'm seeing things with new eyes, and not sure if the newness is because of the coma, or because the things themselves have changed." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What kinds of things?" "You." His thumb traced a small circle against my hip through the fabric of my uniform. "The way you move. The way you talk. Small things that don't match my memories but could just be time distorting everything." This was dangerous territory. I needed to redirect before he started cataloging specific discrepancies. 3 months is a long time. We've both been through trauma. Maybe we're both different now. He considered this, his dark eyes searching my face for something I couldn't name. Maybe, or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time. Before I could process what that meant, he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was brief, tentative, a question rather than a statement. His mouth moved against mine with careful uncertainty, testing boundaries and reactions. I froze for a critical second, before remembering that Valentina would have kissed him back, would have met his uncertainty with confidence. So I responded, my lips parting slightly, one hand coming up to rest against his chest, where I could feel his heart beating as rapidly as my own. The kiss deepened fractionally before he pulled back, his expression unreadable in the dim lighting of the therapy room. "Sorry," he said, though he didn't look particularly sorry. I should have asked first. "You don't need permission to kiss your fiancé." The words came out steady despite the chaos in my chest. This was my first kiss with Lorenzo Ricci, but for him, it should have been one of hundreds, thousands, a familiar act rather than an exploration. It felt like I did. His hand was still on my waist, warm and grounding, like we're starting over somehow. Maybe we are. Maybe that's not a bad thing. He nodded slowly, processing. When his hand finally dropped and he stepped back, I saw calculation behind his eyes, thoughts moving in patterns I couldn't track. He was filing this moment away, adding it to whatever internal database he was building. Testing me, I realized. He'd been testing to see if the kiss felt right, if my responses matched his memories, if the woman standing in front of him was the same one he'd planned to marry. And I had no idea if I'd passed or failed. 6 weeks after Lorenzo opened his eyes in that hospital bed, he moved through the mansion's gym with a fluidity that seemed impossible for someone who'd spent 3 months in a coma. The doctors called it remarkable. Patricia called it stubborn determination overriding medical science. I called it terrifying, because the stronger Lorenzo became physically, the sharper his mind grew, and a sharp mind was dangerous when it started noticing inconsistencies. "Your form is improving," I observed from my usual position near the weight bench. watching him complete a set of pull-ups that would have been impressive for anyone, let alone someone still technically in recovery. He dropped to the ground with barely a grunt, reaching for the towel I'd learned to keep ready. Muscle memory is a strange thing. My body remembers what to do even when my conscious mind doesn't. There was something weighted in that statement, an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. Lorenzo had been making comments like that more frequently, observations about memory and recognition that felt like tests I didn't know how to study for. The mind heals slower than muscle, I offered, handing him a water bottle. Give it time. Time. He took a long drink, his eyes never leaving mine. Everyone keeps telling me to give things time. As if waiting long enough will make the pieces fit together the way they're supposed to. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Are the pieces not fitting? Some are. Some aren't. I can't tell yet if it's because the puzzle changed or because I'm trying to force the wrong pieces into place. Before I could formulate a response that didn't sound defensive, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor shifted, the introspective man disappearing behind the mask of a businessman with decisions to make. I have a meeting in an hour, he said, already moving toward the door. Russian suppliers. Anthony wants me present even though he's been handling them fine without me. Do you need anything? The question came automatically. Part of the role I'd been playing for so long it was becoming reflex. Just be there. He paused in the doorway. I like having you in the room during business discussions. You notice things. The comment should have pleased me. Instead, it sent ice through my veins. Noticing things was exactly what I couldn't afford for him to do. The meeting took place in Lorenzo's study, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old money. Anthony was already there when I arrived, along with two men I recognized from previous gatherings. Vincent Ricci, Lorenzo's uncle who handled legitimate business operations, and a man whose name I'd learned was Joseph Bellini, some kind of financial advisor. The Russians arrived exactly on time, 3 men in dark suits who carried themselves with the careful posture of people accustomed to violence. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with graying temples, introduced himself as Dmitry Volkov. I took my usual seat in the corner, the position Isabetta had told me Valentina always occupied during business meetings. Close enough to observe, far enough to appear decorative rather than participatory. The men settled around Lorenzo's desk, and the negotiation began. They spoke in English, mostly, their accents ranging from heavy to barely noticeable. The discussion centered on shipping routes and percentage splits, the kind of details that should have been boring but carried undertones of threat in every number proposed. Dmitry's second, a younger man with cold blue eyes, made a comment to his colleague in rapid Russian. Something about adjusting the percentages when the boss wasn't looking, skimming off the top. The kind of side conversation meant to be private, assumed to be safe because who in an Italian crime family would speak Russian? That would be unwise, I said, before I could stop myself, the words emerging in flawless Russian. Mr. Ricci has excellent accountants. The room went absolutely silent. Every head turned toward me. Dmitry's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been respect. His colleague looked like he'd swallowed glass, and Lorenzo's face was utterly unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on me with laser focus. You speak Russian, Dmitry said in English, his tone carefully neutral. My heart hammered so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. I'd just made a catastrophic mistake, revealed knowledge that Valentina hadn't possessed, exposed myself in front of witnesses who would remember. I've been learning, I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. After the attack, I thought it would be wise to understand what our international associates are saying. For security purposes, Lorenzo's fingers drummed once against his desk, a controlled movement that somehow conveyed volumes. An excellent precaution, he said smoothly. Perhaps we should conduct the rest of this meeting assuming everyone understands everyone. Transparency builds trust, doesn't it, Dmitry? The Russian inclined his head, and the negotiation resumed with notably more careful language from all parties. But I felt Anthony's eyes on me throughout the rest of the meeting, watching, assessing, filing away this new piece of information into whatever mental database he was constructing. When the Russians finally left 90 minutes later, their deal agreed upon and hands shaken, I tried to slip out with them. Lorenzo's voice stopped me at the door. A moment, please. I turned back to find the study empty, except for Lorenzo and Anthony. The brothers stood near the desk, their body language eerily similar despite their different coloring. Both had their hands in their pockets. Both wore expressions of polite interest that didn't reach their eyes. "When did you learn Russian?" Lorenzo asked, his tone conversational, but his gaze sharp. "I've been studying for a few months. Online courses, mostly. I had a lot of time while you were—" I let the sentence trail off. The implication clear. While you were in a coma, I had nothing to do but wait and prepare for threats. Valentina never mentioned an interest in languages before. This came from Anthony, his voice mild but pointed. I never mentioned a lot of things. The response came out sharper than intended, defensive in a way that Valentina probably wouldn't have been. I softened my tone. The attack changed my perspective, made me realize how vulnerable we are when we don't understand what's happening around us. Lorenzo studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to hold his gaze, even though every instinct screamed to look away. Finally, he nodded. That was well done today. Dimitri's people won't try to cheat us now that they know we understand them. The dismissal was clear. I escaped to my room and sat on the edge of the bed with shaking hands, replaying the scene over and over. How many other mistakes had I made without realizing? How many small discrepancies had Lorenzo and Anthony catalogued, building toward a conclusion I couldn't afford for them to reach? 2 days later, the family gathered for dinner in the formal dining room. It was a Thursday, which meant Isabella had asked the chef to prepare traditional Italian dishes, rather than the fusion cuisine she sometimes favored for more casual meals. The table was set with china that probably cost more than a car, crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead, and enough silverware to confuse someone who hadn't spent weeks memorizing proper dining etiquette from online videos. I'd learned to navigate these dinners through careful observation and strategic silence. Let others lead conversations. Smile at jokes even when I didn't fully understand the context. Never volunteer information that might contradict something Valentina had said or done months ago. The first courses passed without incident. Conversation flowed around topics I'd learned to track. Business developments that skirted the line between legal and not. Family friends experiencing various dramas, speculation about rival families and their movements. Then Isabella gestured to the staff, and they brought out the main course. "Pumpkin gnocchi," she announced with clear pleasure. "I asked Chef Mario to make Valentina's favorite tonight. It's been so long since we had it. And with Lorenzo recovering so well, I thought it would be nice to celebrate with the things we love." The plate set in front of me looked beautiful, pillowy gnocchi in a brown butter sage sauce that smelled rich and earthy. Around the table, everyone made appreciative noises and began eating. I picked up my fork and took a bite. The flavor was fine. Good, even, by objective standards. But I'd never particularly enjoyed pumpkin and savory dishes. Found the sweetness awkward against the sage and butter. My face must have done something, some micro-expression of disappointment or distaste. Because when I looked up, Lorenzo was watching me with that focused intensity that had become increasingly common. "You don't like it," he observed quietly. Everyone's attention swiveled to me. Isabella's face fell slightly, confused and concerned. Anthony's eyes narrowed fractionally. Vincent paused mid-bite. "No, it's delicious," I said quickly, taking another forkful to prove the point. "I was just thinking about something else. It's perfect, really. You used to say this was your favorite dish." Lorenzo's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath the casual tone. "You'd request it for every birthday, every celebration. You'd eat it until you were sick." The bite of gnocchi turned to paste in my mouth. I swallowed with difficulty, scrambling for an explanation that would make sense. "Tastes change," I managed. "After the accident, after everything, I guess my preferences shifted. Trauma does that sometimes." The excuse was wearing thin. I could see it in the way Lorenzo's jaw tightened, the way Anthony set down his fork with deliberate care. How many times could I blame the accident for being a different person before they stopped accepting the explanation? "Of course," Isabella said, rushing to fill the uncomfortable silence. "That makes perfect sense. Our bodies and minds process trauma in unexpected ways. Would you like Chef Mario to prepare something else?" "No, this is fine, really." I forced myself to eat more, to clean my plate like someone who was simply being polite, rather than someone choking down evidence of her own deception. The rest of dinner passed in stilted conversation that everyone pretended was normal, but the damage was done. Another crack in the facade. Another reason for Lorenzo to question whether the woman sitting across from him was the same one he'd planned to marry. In the 8th week after Lorenzo's awakening, I started noticing the surveillance. It was subtle at first. A black SUV parked across from the cafe where I'd stopped for coffee. The same vehicle idling near the boutique where I'd gone to pick up alterations on one of Valentina's dresses that didn't quite fit my slightly different proportions. A glimpse of it in my rearview mirror on the drive back to the mansion. By the 3rd sighting, I was certain. Someone was following me. My first thought was the triad. Some delayed retaliation for the attack that had put Lorenzo in a coma. But the surveillance felt too obvious, too consistently visible. If they wanted to hurt me, they wouldn't advertise their presence, which meant it was someone else. Someone who wanted me to know I was being watched. On the 4th day of noticing the SUV, I pulled into the mansion's driveway and parked near the garden entrance rather than the main house. I waited, counting seconds, until the black vehicle rolled to a stop just outside the property gates. Then I got out and walked directly toward it. The driver's window rolled down as I approached, revealing Anthony's carefully neutral expression. He sat behind the wheel himself rather than using a driver, which somehow made the whole thing worse. This wasn't delegated surveillance. This was personal. "Are you planning to follow me everywhere?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger and fear churning in my gut. "Just conducting due diligence." He turned off the engine and stepped out of the vehicle, his tall frame unfolding with casual grace. Standard security protocol after an attack like the one you and Lorenzo survived. "We've been monitoring everyone close to the family. For 8 weeks? For as long as necessary." He leaned against the SUV, the picture of relaxation except for his eyes, which missed nothing. You'd be surprised what people reveal when they think they're alone. The threat was barely veiled. "What exactly are you looking for?" Anthony smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made my blood run cold. Inconsistencies, gaps, anything that doesn't quite fit the pattern we expect. "And have you found any?" The question was a risk, but I needed to know how much he'd discovered. "Let's not play games, Lucia." The use of my real name hit like a physical blow. "I know. I've known since the 2nd week Lorenzo woke up. I hired an investigator the day after he regained consciousness, standard procedure for protecting the family from potential threats or infiltration. It took him 72 hours to confirm what I'd already suspected." My legs threatened to give out. I locked my knees, refusing to show weakness even as my entire world tilted. "What did he confirm?" "That Valentina Moretti died in the accident. That her twin sister, Lucia Moretti, was convinced by my mother to assume her identity. That this entire charade has been orchestrated by my family to protect Lorenzo during his recovery." He pushed off from the SUV, closing the distance between us. "I know everything." "Then why haven't you told him?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Because my brother just came back from the dead." Anthony's expression hardened. "Because piling the death of his fiancée on top of 3 months in a coma might actually break him in ways physical therapy can't fix. Because despite the lie you're living, I believe your presence has helped his recovery. But I can't let this continue indefinitely." He pulled out his phone, tapped something, then showed me the screen. It was a calendar, with a date circled 2 weeks from now. Lorenzo will be medically cleared for full activity by this date. No more physical restrictions, no more cognitive concerns, no more excuses about trauma and healing. When he reaches that point, he deserves the truth. My throat closed around words I couldn't form. "You have 2 weeks, Anthony continued, pocketing his phone. 2 weeks to find the courage to tell him yourself, to control how the revelation happens, to at least give him the respect of honesty from someone he trusts. If you don't," he let the sentence hang, the implication clear. "You'll tell him. I'll tell him everything. And Lucia?" He waited until I met his eyes. "It will be kinder coming from you. More controlled, less catastrophic. I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing. I suggest you take it." He got back in the SUV and drove through the gates, leaving me standing alone in the driveway with the weight of a deadline crushing down on me. 2 weeks. 14 days to figure out how to confess the unconfessable. How to tell a man who'd trusted me that everything about our relationship was built on lies. How to explain that the woman he loved was dead, and I'd been wearing her life like a costume. That night, I locked myself in my room and tried to write a confession. The words wouldn't come. Every sentence I started sounded wrong, inadequate, impossible to say out loud without destroying everything. I tried again the next night, and the next, filling pages with false starts and crossed-out attempts, none of them capturing the enormity of what I'd done, or finding a way to frame it that didn't make me sound like a monster. During the day, I continued the performance, sitting through meals with the family, helping Lorenzo with exercises he barely needed assistance with anymore, playing the role of devoted fiancé to a man who was starting to look at me like I was a puzzle he was very close to solving. Because Lorenzo was watching me now with the full force of his considerable intelligence. Every gesture I made, every word I chose, every reaction to familiar situations was catalogued and analyzed. I could see him building his case, assembling evidence toward a conclusion I couldn't let him reach on his own. The deadline Anthony had given me ticked down like a bomb. 12 days. 10 days. 8 days. And still, I hadn't found the words that would end this without destroying him. In the 9th week after his awakening, during an evening where we sat together in the library reviewing business reports he'd asked me to help with, Lorenzo closed the folder in front of him and turned to face me fully. "You're afraid of something," he said without preamble. "I've been watching you, and there's fear in everything you do. The way you hesitate before answering questions. The way you study me when you think I'm not looking. Like you're waiting for something terrible to happen." My heart stopped. The attack left scars. Invisible ones, but they're there. This isn't trauma from the attack. This is something else. He reached out and took my hand, his grip gentle but inescapable. "Talk to me. Whatever it is, we can handle it together. But I can't help if you won't let me in." The irony was devastating. He was offering support for the very deception I was perpetrating against him, promising to help me through a crisis that he was the center of. "It's complicated," I whispered, because that at least was true. "Then uncomplicate it. We have time." But we didn't. The clock was running out, and when it hit 0, everything I'd built with lies would come crashing down around both of us. 10 weeks after Lorenzo opened his eyes in that hospital bed, Anthony found me in the garden at dusk. The air smelled of jasmine and the expensive fertilizer the groundskeepers used on the roses. I'd been sitting on a stone bench for over an hour, trying to gather courage I didn't possess. "He knows," Anthony said without preamble, settling beside me with the controlled movements of someone delivering bad news. "I told him 3 days ago." My entire body went cold. "What?" "Lorenzo came to me with plans to take you to the apartment tomorrow. The one he shared with Valentina. He was setting up an elaborate test, something designed to catch you in undeniable proof of the deception." Anthony's blue eyes held no sympathy, only pragmatic assessment. I couldn't let him find out that way. Not in a moment designed for maximum pain. So I told him first. "You said I had 2 weeks. The accusation came out broken, strangled. I said you had until he was medically cleared. But when I saw what he was planning, I made a judgment call." He stood, brushing invisible dust from his trousers. "He's still taking you to the apartment tomorrow. He wants to hear it from you. Wants to see if you'll keep lying even when he's giving you the chance to confess. Consider it a final mercy." He walked away, leaving me alone with the jasmine and the certainty that tomorrow would destroy everything. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't eat breakfast the next morning. My hands shook so badly I had to clasp them together to hide the trembling when Lorenzo appeared in the doorway of my room at 10 o'clock. "Ready?" he asked, his voice perfectly neutral. His dark eyes revealed nothing. No anger or pain or accusation, just carefully controlled emptiness. "Lorenzo, I need to tell you something before we go." "Tell me there." He turned without waiting for my response, assuming I would follow. And I did. Because what choice did I have? The confession would happen regardless. Better to control the location than let it spill out in the mansion's hallways where anyone might overhear. The drive into Manhattan took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Lorenzo drove himself, something he'd only recently been cleared to do, handling the expensive car with the same controlled precision he applied to everything. We didn't speak. The silence stretched between us like a living thing, heavy with everything unsaid. The apartment building was exactly what I had expected. Luxury high-rise in a neighborhood where the monthly maintenance fees probably exceeded my annual income from before all this started. The doorman greeted Lorenzo by name, with the kind of deference reserved for residents who tipped well and commanded respect. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. I watched the numbers climb, each floor bringing us closer to the moment when everything would shatter. Lorenzo stood beside me with his hands in his pockets, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same scent I'd grown accustomed to over months of proximity. Cedar and something darker, more complex. A smell I'd probably always associate with this particular kind of dread. The apartment door swung open on silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the far wall, offering views of the city that would be stunning if I had any capacity to appreciate them. The space was modern, clean-lined, decorated with the kind of taste that came from either professional designers or people raised with money. Cream-colored furniture, dark wood accents, art on the walls that probably cost more than my education. I'd never been here. Valentina had kept this place separate from her visits home, a symbol of her elevated life that she didn't share with her struggling twin sister. Looking at it now felt like trespassing in a museum dedicated to someone else's existence. "Do you remember the last time we were here together?" Lorenzo asked, closing the door behind us. His tone remained conversational, almost casual. "Before the accident, every muscle in my body tensed. It feels like a lifetime ago. Does it?" Not a question, just acknowledgement. He moved deeper into the space with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of it. "Show me where we kept the wine glasses. The good ones. The crystal we only used for special occasions." My mind went blank. I had no idea. Kitchen seemed logical, but which cabinet? Upper or lower? Left side or right? The ignorance yawned before me like a chasm with no bottom. "I don't—" My voice cracked. "Lorenzo, please, try," he suggested, still with that terrible gentleness. "It was your home, too. Surely you remember where we kept things." I walked toward the kitchen because standing frozen would be worse. Opened a cabinet at random and found dinner plates. Tried another and discovered mixing bowls. Lorenzo watched from the doorway, his expression unchanging as I fumbled through my own ignorance. "They're in the upper cabinet beside the sink," he said finally. "You picked them out yourself." Insisted on Waterford crystal even though I thought it was excessive for an apartment we barely used. The words were daggers, each one precisely placed. I abandoned the cabinets and turned to face him, my back pressed against the counter like it could provide support my legs no longer could. "The guest bathroom," he continued, moving to lean against the opposite counter. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, claustrophobic despite the expensive appliances and granite countertops. "What color are the towels?" "I don't know." "The bedroom closet. Which side is mine?" "I don't know." "The painting in the living room, the abstract piece above the sofa. Where did we buy it?" "I don't know." The words came out too loud, echoing off the expensive surfaces. "Lorenzo, please stop." One more. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and music filled the apartment. Jazz, old school, the kind that felt intimate and melancholy. "This song, do you remember it?" I shook my head, tears already gathering in my eyes. "We danced to it right there in the living room the night I proposed. You were barefoot because you'd kicked off your heels at dinner. You stepped on my foot 3 times and laughed every time. When the song ended, you said yes." His voice never rose, never broke. The control was somehow worse than shouting would have been. "Do you remember any of that?" "No." The confession emerged as barely more than a whisper. Lorenzo turned off the music. The silence that replaced it felt apocalyptic. He moved to the cream sofa and sat with deliberate care, gesturing to the chair across from him like we were about to have a civilized conversation, rather than watch my entire world collapse. "Sit down, Lucia." The use of my real name made my knees give out. I collapsed into the chair more than sat, my hands gripping the armrests like they were the only solid things in a dissolving reality. "Anthony told me 3 days ago," Lorenzo said, his dark eyes finally showing emotion. Pain, anger, betrayal. all carefully controlled but visible beneath the surface. He'd hired an investigator the week I woke up. Standard security protocol. Found out the truth within days. But he kept it quiet because he was trying to protect me. Give me time to heal before hitting me with more trauma. Lorenzo, let me finish. The command was quiet but absolute. 3 days ago, Anthony came to me because he realized I was planning this exact scenario, bringing you here to prove what I'd already started to suspect. He decided it would be less cruel to prepare me first, to give me time to process before confronting you. So I've known for 3 days that my fiancé died in the accident, that her twin sister has been impersonating her for months, that my entire family conspired to lie to me about the most fundamental truth of my life. Each sentence hit like a physical blow. I doubled over in the chair, sobs tearing from my chest before I could stop them. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant, tell me everything. His voice cut through my breakdown with surgical precision. No more lies. No more half-truths. Everything. So I did. Through tears and gasping breaths, I confessed it all. How Isabetta had come to me 2 weeks after the accident, when Valentina's body was barely buried. How she'd explained that Lorenzo needed stability to survive, that the shock might kill him or set back his recovery permanently. How she'd convinced me it would be temporary, just until he woke up, just until he could handle the truth. I told him about studying photos and videos until my eyes burned, about practicing Valentina's laugh and gestures and the way she moved through rooms, about the terror of every meal, every conversation, every moment when someone might reference something I didn't know, about the wedding dress I couldn't bring myself to try on, about falling asleep each night, drowning in guilt. I never wanted to hurt you. I finished, my voice wrecked from crying. I thought it would be days, maybe a week or 2. I never imagined it would go on this long. Never thought I'd end up caring about you while wearing my dead sister's face. Lorenzo sat motionless throughout the entire confession, his expression carved from stone. When I finally fell silent, he didn't speak immediately. The pause stretched until I wanted to scream just to break it. Valentina died in my arms, he said eventually. I remember it now, every detail. The way the light left her eyes, the exact moment when I knew she was gone. And then I woke up months later to find her sister sitting beside my bed, wearing her ring, letting me believe in a miracle that never happened. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. He stood abruptly, pacing to the windows and staring out at the city below. Apologies don't fix this. They don't undo months of deception. They don't bring back the woman I loved or restore the trust you all decided I didn't deserve to have. You're right. Nothing I say will fix this. My mother. He turned back to face me, and the betrayal in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. Anthony. You. Everyone I should have been able to trust decided I was too fragile to handle the truth. Decided to play with my life like I was a child who needed protection from reality. We were trying to help. By lying to me, his control finally cracked, anger bleeding through in his raised voice. By letting me believe my fiancée survived when she's been dead this entire time. By making me fall for a ghost wearing stolen skin. The accusation hung between us. I'd known this moment would come eventually, but experiencing it was worse than any nightmare I'd imagined. Because he was right. Everything he said was completely, devastatingly right. Get out. The words were quiet again. Bled of emotion. Exhausted rather than angry. Go back to the mansion. Pack your things and get out of my life. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your explanations. I just want you gone. I stood on shaking legs. Lorenzo. Now. He turned back to the window, dismissing me without another glance. Before I say something we'll both regret more than we already do. The drive back to the mansion was a blur. I don't remember traffic or stoplights or anything beyond my hands gripping the steering wheel and the taste of tears I couldn't stop. The security gates opened automatically, recognizing my car, unaware that I was about to be exiled from the sanctuary they protected. I parked and walked straight to my room, moving on autopilot, pulled my single suitcase from the closet and started throwing in the few possessions that actually belonged to me. Most of the clothes I'd been wearing were Valentina's, altered to fit my slightly different proportions. I left them hanging where they'd always belonged, returning borrowed things to their proper owner's ghost. The sound of the door opening made me turn. Isabella stood in the doorway, her elegant composure cracked by obvious distress. She'd been crying, I realized. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes, her carefully maintained appearance disheveled in a way I'd never seen. "Lucia, wait." She moved into the room, hands reaching toward me in supplication. "Please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." I continued packing, needing the mechanical activity to keep from collapsing completely. "You asked me to lie to your son." I agreed. "Now he knows and hates both of us. That's the entire story." I was trying to protect him. Her voice broke on the words. "He'd just survived a coma. The doctor said emotional trauma could set back his recovery, might even be fatal given his weakened state. I made a choice based on what I thought would keep him alive. You made a choice that destroyed his trust in everyone around him." I zipped the suitcase with more force than necessary. "That's not protection. That's manipulation disguised as love." "I know." The admission came out as a sob. Isabella sank onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders shaking. I'd never seen her like this, stripped of the careful control that usually defined her. "I know I was wrong. I've known for weeks, maybe months, but I didn't know how to stop it once it started. Didn't know how to tell him the truth without destroying everything. For a moment, I felt something like kinship with this woman who'd orchestrated my deception. We'd both been caught in a trap of our own making, both too cowardly to choose honesty when it might have mattered. "He'll forgive you eventually," I said, picking up my suitcase. "You're his mother. He loves you even when he hates what you've done. But me?" I moved toward the door, forcing her to step aside. "I'm just the woman who impersonated his dead fiancé. He'll never forgive that. Where will you go?" "My old apartment, if it's still available. If not, somewhere else. Anywhere that isn't here." Isabella reached out one last time, her hand catching my arm. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For asking you to do this. For not stopping it sooner. For ruining your life along with my son's." I looked at her tear-stained face and felt empty of everything except exhaustion. "I know you are. That doesn't change anything." I pulled away and walked out, leaving her crying in the room that had been my prison and my haven for nearly 3 months. Down the hallway where I'd learned to walk like my sister, past the dining room where I'd pretended to love pumpkin gnocchi, through the foyer where I'd first entered as a desperate, grieving woman and became something else entirely. Anthony was waiting by the front door. Of course he was. He'd probably been tracking this entire disaster from a distance, watching the consequences of his own choices unfold. "You did the right thing," he said as I approached. "Not taking any of her things. Starting clean. I didn't do the right thing for 3 months." I set down my suitcase to open the door myself. "Don't pretend one moment of integrity erases everything that came before. Lorenzo will heal. He's stronger than you think." "I hope you're right." And I did, despite everything. Despite the anger and hurt and betrayal. I genuinely hoped Lorenzo would recover from this new trauma, that he'd find someone real to love, someone who wouldn't wear lies like jewelry. Take care of him. That was always the plan. I left without looking back, loading my pathetic single suitcase into the car and driving away from the mansion's gates. Away from Lorenzo's recovery rooms and Isabella's tears and Anthony's careful surveillance. Away from the life I'd borrowed and the ghost I'd been channeling. My old apartment building looked smaller than I remembered. Shabbier, the paint peeling near the entrance, and the hallway smelling like someone had burned dinner 3 days ago and never opened a window. But the super still had my key because I'd never officially moved out. Just quietly stopped coming home while I played dress-up in a world that was never mine. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Dust covered every surface. The plants I'd been growing on the windowsill were long dead. Mail had piled up behind the door where the super had been shoving it through the slot. Bills and advertisements and catalogs addressed to Lucia Moretti, proof that this person still existed even when I'd been pretending to be someone else. I dropped my suitcase just inside the door and collapsed onto the old sofa that had been here when I moved in. Too heavy for the previous tenant to bother removing. And then I cried. Not the pretty, delicate tears from movies. ugly, gasping sobs that tore from my chest and left me shaking. I cried for Valentina, dead for months while I paraded around in her identity. Cried for Lorenzo, who'd woken from a coma to a carefully constructed lie. Cried for myself, for the person I'd been before agreeing to this deception, and would never be again. 3 days passed in a haze. I didn't eat, barely drank water, just moved between the sofa and the bed, sleeping in fragments and waking to the crushing weight of what I'd done. My phone buzzed constantly with messages I didn't read, calls I didn't answer. Probably Isabetta, possibly Anthony, not Lorenzo. Never Lorenzo. On the 4th morning, I finally forced myself upright. Showered for the first time since leaving the mansion. Made coffee that tasted like ash but at least contained caffeine. Looked at my reflection and saw a stranger. Not Valentina anymore, but not quite Lucia either. Someone caught between identities, belonging nowhere. I'd destroyed my own life along with Lorenzo's. That was the truth I had to live with now. The cost of playing guardian to someone who never asked for my protection. Of accepting Isabetta's desperate bargain. Of being too weak to confess before Anthony forced the issue. There was no going back. No way to undo the months of deception or restore the trust I'd helped destroy. I could only move forward into whatever future existed beyond this wreckage, carrying the weight of what I'd done like a scar that would never fully heal. Outside my window, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. People going to work, living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just ended in every way that mattered. And I sat alone in my tiny apartment wearing yesterday's clothes, too exhausted even for tears, wondering how anyone recovered from destroying themselves so thoroughly in the name of protecting someone else. By the end of the first week back in my apartment, I'd managed to establish a minimal routine. Wake up, stare at the ceiling, force down coffee, ignore my phone. The messages had slowed from a flood to a trickle, mostly Isabetta's increasingly desperate attempts to check if I was alive. I deleted them without reading past the first few words. The apartment felt smaller each day, the walls closing in like a trap I'd walked into voluntarily. I kept the curtains drawn, unable to face the city outside, or the memories of driving through it in Lorenzo's expensive car, wearing Valentina's clothes, pretending to be someone I'd never been. At 2:47 p.m. on the 4th day, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had become synonymous with complications I couldn't handle, but something made me swipe to accept, some instinct that standing still was becoming more dangerous than movement. Hello? Is this someone from the Moretti family? The voice was male, accented with Mandarin inflections that turned certain syllables sharp and clipped. My entire body went cold. Who is this? A low chuckle came through the line, humorous in a way that made my skin crawl. That's not important. What matters is that we've been watching the Ricci mansion very carefully for weeks now. An informant inside their organization reported something interesting. The woman everyone thought was Valentina Moretti left the estate alone, looking upset, carrying a single suitcase. That suggested either a departure or an opportunity. I stood up without conscious decision, moving to the window. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the street below. A black SUV sat parked directly in front of my building. Even from 3 floors up, I could see 2 men in dark suits standing beside it, looking up at my exact window. We have excellent researchers. The voice continued conversationally. Once we knew to look for Valentina Moretti's connections, finding her twin sister Lucia wasn't difficult. Public utility records show an apartment lease in your name. Very easy to locate once we knew you existed. What do you want? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Years of pretending to be confident finally serving a useful purpose. The triad has unfinished business with the Ricci family. Your boyfriend, or ex-boyfriend, or whatever he is now, he's been a problem for our operations. The attack 3 months ago was meant to eliminate that problem. Obviously, it didn't work. The casual tone made it worse somehow, discussing attempted murder like a failed business transaction. But we've learned that Lorenzo Ricci cares about the Moretti family. First Valentina, now you. That makes you valuable. I'm nobody to him anymore. The truth tasted bitter. You're wasting your time. Perhaps. But we'd like to test that theory. Consider this a courtesy call. We know where you are. We know you're alone. And we're coming up." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for one frozen second before my survival instincts kicked into gear. I had maybe minutes before they breached the building, and my apartment door had the kind of cheap lock that wouldn't slow down professionals for more than 30 seconds. There was only one number that could help me now, even though calling it felt like swallowing glass. Lorenzo answered on the second ring. What? Not a question. Just flat acknowledgement. His voice held none of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to during his recovery. No softness for the woman who'd lied to him for months. The triad found me. The words tumbled out rapid fire. Panic overriding pride. They called. They're outside my building right now. They said they're coming up and I don't know what to do, and I know you hate me, but please. Address. The single word cut through my spiral. Now. I rattled off the apartment number and building address. The information I'd written on dozens of forms and applications back when this place represented independence rather than a hiding spot. Lock every door and window. Stay away from anything with a sightline from outside. I'm sending people. He paused for half a breath. They'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't open the door for anyone else. The call ended before I could thank him or apologize or do anything except follow his instructions. I locked the apartment door and pushed my pathetic sofa in front of it for good measure, knowing it wouldn't stop anyone determined but needing to feel like I was doing something. Checked the windows, made sure they were secure, then crouched in the bathroom with the door locked because it was the only room without external windows. 8 minutes later, I heard shouting from the hallway. Heavy footsteps. Commands delivered in voices that expected immediate obedience. Then silence, more terrifying than the noise had been. A knock on the door made me flinch so hard I hit my head on the bathroom wall. Lucia Moretti? A different voice. American accent. Professionally neutral. Lorenzo Ricci sent us. We're here to extract you to a secure location. I emerged from the bathroom on shaking legs, moving the sofa back enough to crack open the door. 4 men in tactical gear stood in my hallway, weapons visible but not pointed at me. Behind them, I could see my neighbors peeking out of doorways with expressions ranging from terror to fascination at the drama unfolding. Where are the men from the SUV? I asked, not moving from the relative safety of my doorway. Detained downstairs for questioning by local authorities. The lead man was built like he'd been carved from concrete, his expression completely neutral. Your building super called it in the moment he saw the force lock. They arrived fast. His gaze swept the corridor once, measuring exits and shadows like a habit. We need to move now. Bring nothing. We'll provide what you need. I grabbed my phone and wallet by reflex, then let them hustle me down the stairs with 2 men in front and 2 behind. A moving box of protection that felt claustrophobic and necessary in equal measure. Outside, 2 more black SUVs had replaced the triad's vehicle. They loaded me into the back of one, and we were moving before I'd even fastened my seatbelt. The drive took 40 minutes through traffic that the driver navigated with aggressive efficiency. We left Manhattan behind, crossed into New Jersey, drove through increasingly suburban neighborhoods until we reached a development that screamed upper-middle-class anonymity. The house they pulled up to looked exactly like its neighbors. 2 stories, neutral siding, landscaping maintained but not ostentatious. The kind of place you'd forget 5 minutes after driving past it. Perfect for hiding someone. They escorted me inside with the same professional efficiency, sweeping through rooms to ensure security before finally relaxing fractionally. The interior was furnished but impersonal, like a model home or an extended stay hotel. Clean surfaces, neutral colors, nothing that suggested actual people lived here. Lorenzo stood in the living room with his back to the door, looking out the window at the quiet street beyond. He'd lost weight, I realized, the suit hanging slightly wrong on his frame. His shoulders carried tension that hadn't been there even in the worst days of his physical therapy. Secure, one of the security team announced. Perimeter is clear. We'll maintain shifts around the clock. Lorenzo nodded without turning. The team dispersed to stations throughout the house, leaving us alone in the living room's carefully neutral space. Thank you, I said to his back, for sending them, for getting me out. Don't thank me yet. He finally turned, and the exhaustion on his face hit me like a physical blow. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and new lines had appeared around his mouth in just 4 days. This situation is complicated. I can leave. Go somewhere else. Somewhere they won't find me. There is nowhere they won't find you. He moved to the sofa and sat with the careful movements of someone conserving energy. The triad has been using my relationship with Valentina as leverage for months. The attack 3 months ago wasn't random violence. It was a targeted hit designed to eliminate both me and the woman they believed I loved, removing obstacles to their operations in one strike. I sank into the chair across from him, my legs finally giving out. But Valentina died. They won their leverage. That's what we thought too. Why they backed off after the attack, assumed both of us were dead or broken. His dark eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. But someone inside my organization has been feeding them information. That informant reported that you left the mansion, that there was a twin, that you'd been pretending to be Valentina for months. Once they knew you existed, tracking you down through public records was trivial. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. So now I'm the leverage again. Now you're a liability they want to eliminate, and a tool they could potentially use against me. He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something harder had settled into his expression. Which brings us to why you're here instead of somewhere else. Because you're protecting me. It felt presumptuous saying it out loud, assuming he'd extend protection to the woman who'd betrayed him so thoroughly. Because I won't let the triad use another Moretti sister as a playing piece in their war with my family. The correction was sharp, deliberately cutting. This isn't about you specifically, Lucia. It's about not giving them weapons to use against us. That's pragmatic strategy, not sentiment. The words landed exactly as he'd intended them to, drawing clear lines between protection and caring, between what he was willing to do and what he was willing to feel. I nodded, swallowing around the lump in my throat. Understood. You'll stay here under security until we resolve this. 4 bedrooms. Team works in shifts. No external contact without clearance. There's food in the kitchen. Basic supplies in the bathrooms. You're not a prisoner, but you're not free to leave either. How long? Until I eliminate the threat. Or negotiate a truce that keeps you off their target list. He stood. The conversation apparently concluded in his mind. Try to stay out of the way. I have work to do. The first week at the safe house passed in strange, suspended animation. Lorenzo worked from a converted bedroom office, taking video calls and managing operations through encrypted channels I wasn't allowed to observe. The security team rotated through shifts with military precision, acknowledging me with nods, but no conversation beyond necessary communication. I existed in the negative space between captivity and safety, free to move through the house but trapped within its walls by threats I couldn't see. I read books from the surprisingly well-stocked shelves, cooked meals that Lorenzo ate mechanically when reminded, tried not to think about how my entire life had collapsed into this anonymous suburban prison. On the 8th night, everything changed. I couldn't sleep, restless energy making the bedroom feel claustrophobic. I wandered downstairs around 2 a.m. to find Lorenzo still working in his office, the blue light from multiple monitors painting his face in harsh angles. His door was cracked open, and I could hear him speaking in rapid Italian to someone on a call. I was about to retreat when I heard something else. A second conversation happening in the background of Lorenzo's call. Voices speaking what I initially thought was Italian, but resolved into Mandarin Chinese as I focused. My college degree had been in comparative literature with a focus on Asian languages. I'd loved it. Spent 4 years immersed in Chinese literature and culture before dropping out to help Valentina when her life had imploded. The language came back like muscle memory as I listened to the background conversation bleeding through Lorenzo's call. They were speaking in code, but it was cultural code. References to classical Chinese literature that would sound like nonsense to anyone who hadn't studied it extensively. The general prepares his horses at dawn wasn't about animals. It was a reference to a famous military strategy poem about surprise attacks at first light. They were planning something for dawn, something involving the Ricci family's operations. I knocked on the office door frame. Lorenzo's head snapped up, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. He held up a finger, finishing his call before addressing me. It's the middle of the night. That conversation your contact was having in the background. The Mandarin one. I moved into the office despite not being invited. They're planning an attack. Tomorrow at dawn. On your warehouse, I think, based on the reference to storing grain during winter. Lorenzo stared at me for 3 full seconds. You speak Mandarin. I studied Chinese literature in college. That wasn't casual conversation. It was coded military strategy hidden in classical references. The words tumbled out rushed as I tried to explain. The phrase about preparing horses at dawn, it's from Sun Tzu's commentaries. It means early morning attack. And the winter grain storage is probably literal, your actual warehouse where you store shipments. He was already pulling up files on his computer, cross-referencing information I couldn't see. The Eastern warehouse. We have a major shipment coming in tomorrow, valuable enough that losing it would cost us millions, and political capital we can't afford to lose. Can you move it? Not in time. But I can be ready when they hit us. He pulled out his phone, started making calls with clipped efficiency. Anthony, we have credible intelligence about an attack on the Eastern facility. Dawn tomorrow. I need everyone available there in defensive positions by 5 a.m. I backed out of the office, letting him coordinate the response. My part was done. The small contribution I could make toward mitigating the chaos I'd helped create by existing. At dawn, Lorenzo left with half the security team, leaving me under guard with the remainder. The house felt emptier with him gone, more obviously a cage despite the comfortable furnishings. I spent the morning unable to focus on anything, jumping at every sound, wondering if my information had been accurate, or if I'd sent Lorenzo into danger based on half-remembered college courses. He returned at 2 p.m., exhausted, but satisfied. Blood spattered his shirt cuff, but he moved without favoring any injuries, so I assumed it wasn't his. Your intelligence was perfect, he said, accepting the coffee I'd made without being asked. They hit the warehouse at dawn exactly as you predicted. We were waiting. Took them completely by surprise. Anyone hurt? 2 of theirs dead, several injured. We captured 2 of their mid-level people alive, lieutenants who were directing the operation. He drank the coffee in long gulps, needing the caffeine. That gives us leverage for negotiation. Over the next 3 days, Lorenzo orchestrated a truce with cold-blooded precision. The captured lieutenants became bargaining chips in video negotiations I was allowed to observe from just outside the frame. The Triad leadership wanted their people back. Lorenzo wanted guaranteed safety for anyone connected to the Ricci family, including by extension the Moretti sisters. The final video call happened on the 4th day after the warehouse attack. Lorenzo set up his laptop in the living room, positioning himself in the frame with professional precision. Then he gestured for me to join him. Stand here, he instructed, indicating a spot just to his left, close enough to be clearly visible, but slightly behind him, in a position that suggested both protection and ownership. The call connected to show 3 men in an elegant office somewhere I didn't recognize. The one in the center was clearly the leader, older than the others with silver threading his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Ricci, the man said with perfect English and minimal accent, you have something that belongs to us, and you've been trying to take something that belongs to me. Lorenzo's voice carried absolute authority, the tone of someone accustomed to commanding rather than requesting. I'm prepared to return your lieutenants unharmed in exchange for guaranteed cessation of all hostilities toward anyone connected to my family. Connected is a broad term. Then let me be specific. Lorenzo gestured toward me without looking away from the screen. This is Lucia Moretti. She's under my permanent protection. Any action taken against her or her family will be considered an act of war against the Ricci organization. Is that clear enough? The Triad leader's eyes moved to me, assessing and cataloging. The replacement sister. I'd heard rumors you'd been foolish enough to fall for her lies. What I fell for doesn't concern you. What concerns you is that touching her means war. A smile that held no warmth. You replace one Moretti sister with another like they're interchangeable parts. Very pragmatic, Mr. Ricci. I can respect that. Lorenzo's jaw tightened fractionally, but his voice remained controlled. Do we have an agreement? Return our people unharmed by midnight tonight. We'll withdraw all operations targeting your family, including the sisters. The leader leaned back in his chair. But Mr. Ricci, a word of advice. Be careful which ghosts you try to resurrect. Sometimes the replacement is more dangerous than the original. The call ended before Lorenzo could respond. The silence that followed felt weighted, full of things neither of us knew how to say. Lorenzo closed his laptop with deliberate care, then sat without moving for a long moment. "Thank you," I said finally, "for including me in the truce terms. Like I said, pragmatism," but his voice held less edge than it had before. Exhaustion bleeding through the careful control. "You saved lives with that translation. My people. Potentially civilians if the attack had gone differently. That counts for something. It doesn't erase the months of lies." "No." He looked at me directly for the first time since the video call. "It doesn't. But maybe it's a first step toward understanding that you're more than just the lie you were asked to tell. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't absolution or restored trust. But it was acknowledgement, recognition that I existed as Lucia, separate from the ghost of Valentina. And in that moment, sitting in a safe house living room with coffee going cold on the table between us, it felt like the first honest thing that had passed between us since the day he woke from his coma. The truce with the triad, held through tense negotiations that stretched across the second week at the safe house. Lorenzo worked around the clock, coordinating with Anthony and other family members I heard but never saw, assembling the pieces of a deal that would keep everyone alive. I existed in the margins of that work, present but peripheral. The security team had relaxed fractionally after Lorenzo returned from the warehouse attack unharmed, but the house still felt like a fortress designed to keep the world out, and me contained within. On the third day after providing the translation that had saved the warehouse operation, Lorenzo emerged from his office around dinner time, looking more exhausted than I'd seen since his coma. He found me in the kitchen assembling sandwiches because cooking felt productive when nothing else did. "You don't have to do that," he said, leaning against the counter. "The team handles meals. I needed something to do with my hands." I finished cutting the sandwich and slid the plate toward him. "Turkey and Swiss. There's mustard if you want it." He took the plate without argument, too tired to maintain the careful distance he'd been preserving. We ate in silence for several minutes. The only sound, the quiet hum of the refrigerator and distant voices from the security team's shift change. "The translation you provided," Lorenzo said eventually, setting down his half-eaten sandwich. "The way you decoded their references to classical literature and military strategy. That wasn't something you learned casually. I studied Chinese literature for 4 years in college. Comparative literature with a focus on East Asian cultures. The words came easier than expected, talking about the life I'd abandoned so long ago. I was good at it. My professors said I had a natural ear for linguistic patterns. What happened? Why drop out if you were succeeding? The question I'd been dreading. Not because I didn't want to answer, but because the answer revealed so much about the sister he'd lost and never fully known. Valentina needed help. Her boyfriend at the time got her pregnant and then disappeared when she told him. She was terrified, alone, drowning in medical bills when she miscarried at 4 months. Lorenzo went very still, his sandwich forgotten on the plate. Valentina was pregnant. You didn't know. It wasn't a question. I could see the shock and pain radiating from him in waves. She never told you. We weren't together yet when that happened. We met 2 years ago, but if she was pregnant before that... He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture of frustration I'd learned meant he was processing something difficult. Why wouldn't she tell me later, when we got serious? I think she was ashamed. Not of the pregnancy itself, but of how alone she'd been. How completely that guy had abandoned her when she needed him most. I moved around the kitchen island, needing distance from the pain I was causing. She told me she never wanted to be that vulnerable again. Never wanted to need someone so desperately that losing them would destroy her. So she built walls. Lorenzo's voice had gone quiet, introspective, kept parts of herself separate. I always thought she was just independent, that she valued her privacy. I didn't realize she was protecting herself from being hurt again. She loved you. That was real. But the parts of herself she kept hidden, those were real too. I hesitated, then added, I'm not sure you knew her as completely as you thought you did. I'm not sure anyone did. He processed this in silence, his dark eyes distant with thoughts I couldn't read. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight of realization. You gave up your education to help her through that. Dropped out to work and cover her medical bills. She was my sister, my twin. We'd shared everything since before we were born. How could I not help her when she needed me? And then she built a life you weren't part of. There was no judgment in his tone, just observation. Met me, got engaged, kept her apartment in Manhattan separate from the family she'd come from. Left you behind. The words stung because they were true. Valentina had climbed out of the hole that pregnancy and abandonment had dug. And she'd done it by creating distance from everything that reminded her of being vulnerable, including me. She didn't mean it as rejection, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed that completely. She was trying to become someone new, someone who couldn't be hurt the way she'd been hurt before. But it left you working 2 jobs to pay rent on an apartment you could barely afford, while she wore designer clothes and planned a wedding that probably cost more than you made in a year. Lorenzo stood, pacing to the window with restless energy. I gave her everything she wanted. Money, status, protection. And I never knew she had a twin sister struggling to survive. She kept us separate on purpose. I think she was afraid that if you knew too much about where she came from, you'd see her differently, as less than the polished woman she'd worked so hard to become. He turned to face me, and something in his expression had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. The woman I loved was more complicated than I gave her credit for, and the woman who's been pretending to be her is someone completely different than I assumed. I'm not her. I never was, even when I was trying my hardest to be. No, you're not. He moved back to the counter, finishing his sandwich with mechanical efficiency. You're the sister who sacrificed her future to help family, who learned languages because you genuinely loved them, not because they were useful tools, who translated enemy communications in the middle of the night and probably saved lives without expecting anything in return. The assessment felt too generous, like he was building me into someone better than I actually was. I'm also the person who lied to you for months, who wore your dead fiancé's face and let you believe in something that wasn't real. Yes, you're that too. The acknowledgement hurt more than anger would have. I don't know how to reconcile those things yet. The woman who helped me versus the woman who betrayed me. Maybe they're the same person. Maybe they're not. I'm still figuring it out. Over the following weeks, an unexpected pattern emerged. Lorenzo would work in his office for hours, then emerge seeking conversation rather than solitude. We'd talk about inconsequential things at first. Books on the safe house shelves, news from the outside world, the way the security team played cards during their downtime. But gradually, the conversations deepened. 3 weeks into our forced proximity, during a late evening when exhaustion had stripped away our usual defenses, Lorenzo told me about growing up knowing his entire life was predetermined. How his father had died when Lorenzo was 19, thrusting him into leadership before he was ready. How Anthony had wanted to take over, but family tradition dictated the role go to the younger brother, who'd been groomed for it since birth. I never had a choice, he said, staring into whiskey he'd poured but barely touched. Not about the business, not about the violence that comes with it, not about building my entire identity around being the boss everyone feared. It was just what I was, what I had to be. Did you ever want something different? I asked from my position on the opposite sofa, maintaining the physical distance we'd wordlessly agreed upon. Every day for the first 5 years. Then I stopped wanting it because wanting things you can't have is torture. He took a small sip of whiskey, grimacing slightly. Valentina understood that, I think. She'd also built herself into someone she had to be rather than someone she wanted to be. That's part of why we worked. We were both performing versions of ourselves that the world demanded. And now? Now I'm tired of performing. 3 months in a coma gives you perspective on what matters and what's just theater. He set down his glass with a soft click against the table. I'm trying to figure out how to be Lorenzo Ricci without the costume. It's harder than it sounds. I shared my own version of the same struggle. Growing up as Valentina's twin, always the quieter one, the less vibrant one. The one people forgot was in the room. How I'd gotten used to being second choice, to taking up less space, to making myself smaller so my sister could shine brighter. She was the sun, and I was the moon, I said, wrapping my hands around the tea I'd made. People only noticed me when she wasn't around to outshine me, and I accepted that as just how things were. Like you accepted being the boss. We both got used to roles that didn't fit quite right, but you fought your way out of that role when you dropped out to help her. That took courage, or stupidity. The line between them is thinner than people think. He smiled at that. a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time since the apartment confrontation. Maybe. But I'm starting to think stupidity motivated by love is just another word for loyalty. The conversation ended there, but something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not restored trust, but recognition. We saw each other more clearly than before, stripped of the masks we'd both been wearing for different reasons. On the 25th day at the safe house, Lorenzo appeared in the living room late one night, looking more troubled than usual. I'd been reading, unable to sleep, and looked up at the sound of his footsteps. "I need to visit Valentina's grave," he said, without preamble. "I haven't been since before the accident. Keep putting it off because I don't know what to say to her." He paused, then added, "Would you want to come?" "You don't have to. But if you wanted to say goodbye properly, this would be the chance." The offer surprised me. Including me in something so personal felt like an invitation across the distance he'd been maintaining. Yes, I'd like that. We drove the next morning with 2 security vehicles flanking us, a convoy of protection moving through early traffic toward the cemetery where Valentina had been buried 3 months ago. I'd attended the funeral from a distance, watching from my car as the Ricci family and Valentina's society friends said goodbye to someone they'd thought they knew. The cemetery was exactly what I'd expected. Manicured lawns, marble headstones, the quiet pretension of money extending even into death. Lorenzo led the way to a plot beneath a maple tree, its leaves just starting to turn with the changing season. The headstone was elegant, simple, Valentina Moretti, with dates that bracketed a life too short and more complicated than anyone had realized. Lorenzo stood silent for a long moment, holding white flowers he'd bought along the way. When he finally spoke, it was in Italian, words I understood from my months of desperate study. He was asking forgiveness for not protecting her, for failing to see the attack coming, for surviving when she hadn't. I waited until he stepped back before placing my own offering, a letter I'd written in the pre-dawn hours, trying to articulate an apology that could never be adequate. I'd sealed it in waterproof plastic so the rain wouldn't destroy it, then tucked it against the base of the headstone, where flowers and time would eventually cover it. We cried separately, standing meters apart, mourning the same person from different angles. Lorenzo had lost his future. I'd lost my past. And neither of us could undo the fact that she was gone. On the drive back, Lorenzo broke the silence. "My mother has been calling. 10 times this week, maybe more. She wants to apologize, explain why she orchestrated everything. Will you answer? Eventually. She's my mother. I can't hate her forever even though part of me wants to right now." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "But I can't look at her yet without feeling betrayed, without wondering what else she'd be willing to lie about to protect me. I understand that feeling." I stared out the window at the suburbs rolling past. I feel the same way about myself. Looking in mirrors is complicated these days. "We're quite a pair," he said with dark humor. "Both of us betrayed by people we trusted. Both of us trying to figure out how to exist after everything fell apart. At least we're consistent in our dysfunction." That earned another small smile. There's something to be said for symmetry. 4 weeks after the warehouse attack, Lorenzo summoned me to his office with the formal tone he used for business rather than the casual conversations we'd fallen into. I entered to find him behind his desk, every inch the crime boss rather than the exhausted man I'd been talking to late at night. "The truce with the triad is holding," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Our intelligence suggests they're satisfied with the terms and have moved their focus to other territories, which means you're no longer in immediate danger." Relief, and something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment warred in my chest. "That's good news. It means you can return to a normal life, not your old apartment. That's too exposed and they know the location. But I've arranged for a secure building with monitoring, top-floor unit with good sight lines and controlled access." He slid a folder across the desk. "Lease is already paid for 6 months. There's also a security stipend to cover monitoring costs and any other necessities." I opened the folder to find apartment details and financial information that was far more generous than necessary. "Lorenzo, I can't accept." "You can, and you will. You risked your life because of my family's enemies. The least I can do is ensure you're safe and comfortable going forward." His tone left no room for argument. "There's also information about a language services company that's looking for contractors with Mandarin skills. I may have mentioned your qualifications to their hiring manager. You're setting me up with a job? I'm providing a reference. What you do with it is your choice. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time I saw uncertainty beneath the professional facade. You don't belong here, Lucia. In this house, in my world, in the life you were pretending to live. You deserve the chance to build something real, something that's actually yours. The dismissal was clear, wrapped in generosity but ultimately a door closing. He was giving me freedom because he didn't want the reminder of what I'd done, the walking evidence of months of deception. I understood it intellectually, even as it carved something hollow in my chest. When do I leave? Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next week. The apartment is available now. I stood, taking the folder with its promise of a new life built on foundations I hadn't earned. Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For the apartment. For the job reference. For not hating me as much as you have every right to. I'm working on not hating anyone, he said quietly. It takes too much energy, and I need all I have for figuring out what comes next. What does come next? For you? I don't know yet. That's the terrifying part. He looked at me directly, and in his dark eyes I saw the same uncertainty I felt every morning. But I know it starts with truth. No more performances, no more becoming what other people need me to be. Just figuring out who Lorenzo Ricci actually is underneath all the masks. I hope you find him, the real version. He's probably worth knowing. Same to you. Lucia Moretti without the costumes. I suspect she's more interesting than the ghost she was pretending to be. I left his office with the folder clutched in my hands, and the weight of goodbye settling over everything. The safe house that had been my prison and sanctuary would become just another place I'd lived briefly. Another chapter in the fragmented story of a life I was still learning how to live honestly. I moved into the secured apartment 2 days later, carrying the same single suitcase I'd fled the Ricci mansion with weeks ago. The building was everything Lorenzo had promised. Controlled access, security cameras covering every angle, a top-floor unit with windows that looked out over the city rather than facing other buildings where snipers could position themselves. The space was furnished in that same impersonal way the safe house had been. Neutral colors and functional pieces that suggested no one's actual taste. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my key in the lock. My life to rebuild however I chose. I'd taken the folder Lorenzo provided about the language services company, made the call. Had an interview that went better than expected when I demonstrated my Mandarin fluency and explained my academic background. They hired me as a contractor within a week. Translation work I could do remotely without committing to an office where my past might catch up with me. It wasn't the career I'd dreamed about in college, but it was honest work using skills I'd actually earned rather than stolen from my sister's life. That counted for something. The first 2 weeks alone felt like learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. No security team rotating through shifts. No Lorenzo emerging from his office at odd hours seeking conversation. Just me and the quiet apartment, and the work that filled my days with purpose, even when it couldn't fill the hollow spaces grief and guilt had carved out. Isabetta called on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was reviewing a particularly complex technical translation. I almost didn't answer, seeing her name on the screen and feeling my stomach clench with remembered shame. But avoiding her forever wasn't possible, and maybe not even what I wanted. Lucia. Her voice came through thick with emotion. Thank you for answering. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted, setting aside my work. How are you? Terrible. Better. I don't know. A shaky breath. I'm calling to apologize. Not because it will fix anything, but because you deserve to hear it from me directly. What I asked you to do, what I convinced you was necessary, it was selfish. I prioritized Lorenzo's physical recovery over every other consideration, including the damage it would do to both of you when the truth came out. You were trying to protect your son. I was trying to control an outcome I had no right to control. Her voice broke completely. I thought I could manage the situation, that I could create a safe space for Lorenzo to heal and then reveal the truth gently once he was strong. But I underestimated how long it would take, how complicated the deception would become, how much it would cost everyone involved. I moved to the window. looking out at the city and remembering all the times I'd stood in similar windows at the mansion, wearing Valentina's clothes and pretending to be someone I wasn't. We both made choices we can't undo. We both have to live with what those choices cost. Lorenzo is speaking to me again. Isabetta continued. Not often. Not with the warmth we used to have. But he answers my calls now. Agreed to have dinner last week. We're rebuilding trust one painful conversation at a time. Something in my chest loosened slightly. I'm glad. He needs his family, even when he's angry at them. He needs you too, though he might not realize it yet. Before I could protest, she continued. Not as Valentina's replacement, as Lucia, as the woman who helped him recover, even though she was drowning in guilt the entire time. That person matters, regardless of the lies she was asked to tell. I don't know if he sees it that way. Give him time. Lorenzo processes things slowly, but when he comes to conclusions, they're usually the right ones. She paused, then added softly, I hope you can forgive me, Lucia. Not today necessarily, but someday. I hope we can find a way past what I asked you to do. I thought about it, really thought about whether forgiveness was possible. Isabetta had manipulated me, yes. Had used my grief and desperation and love for my sister to orchestrate an elaborate deception. But she'd also been a mother terrified of losing her son, making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. I forgive you, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. I understand why you did it, even if I wish you hadn't. We were both trying to protect Lorenzo in our own misguided ways. That has to count for something, she cried then, relief and gratitude pouring through the phone in barely coherent words. We talked for another 20 minutes, cautiously rebuilding a connection that had been based on lies, but maybe didn't have to stay that way. When we finally hung up, I felt lighter somehow, as if forgiving her had also created space to forgive myself, just slightly. 1 month and 3 days after leaving the safe house, someone knocked on my apartment door at 7 in the evening. I checked the security camera feed on my phone before answering, a habit Lorenzo's people had drilled into me during the weeks of active threat. Lorenzo stood in my hallway holding flowers. My heart did something complicated and painful in my chest. I opened the door slowly, taking in his appearance with the kind of attention you give to something you thought you'd lost. He looked better than he had at the safe house. The weight he'd lost during his coma and its aftermath had started to return. The exhaustion that had been carved into his features had softened into something more manageable. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a dark sweater, looking more human and less like the crime boss who'd orchestrated truces and ordered operations. These are for you, he said, holding out the flowers. They were coral-colored, unusual, and beautiful. Nothing like the traditional roses that would have felt loaded with implications. I didn't know what you liked, so I asked the florist for something that felt like new beginnings. I took the flowers, their stems cool against my palms. They're perfect. Do you want to come in? He entered with the careful movements of someone navigating unfamiliar territory, looking around the apartment I'd been living in for a month. It's nice. Better than that place you were in before, at least from the security assessment. Much better. The job you helped me get pays well enough that I could have afforded something decent on my own, but this is definitely an upgrade. I found a vase under the sink and started arranging the flowers, needing something to do with my hands. How are you? How's the restructuring going? Slowly. Convincing old school members that we need to move away from certain activities is like trying to turn an ocean liner with a canoe paddle. But Anthony supports the changes, and together we're making progress. He settled on the edge of the sofa. Not quite relaxed, but not as rigid as he'd been. I've been thinking about what Valentina used to say, about legitimacy, about building something that didn't require violence as its foundation. I dismissed it then because I thought she was being naive. Now I'm starting to think she was just seeing clearer than I was. She'd be proud of you for trying. Maybe. Or maybe she'd point out I should have listened years ago instead of waiting until I nearly died to take her seriously. He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket and set it on the coffee table between us. I brought you something else. I sat across from him, leaving the safety of distance, and picked up the box. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was the platinum ring I'd worn for 3 months. Valentina's engagement ring. the symbol of everything I'd pretended to be. "It belongs to her memory," Lorenzo said quietly. "Not to you, not to anyone else. I had it cleaned and reset in its original box. But I wanted you to see it one more time, to understand something." "What?" "That I know why you accepted my family's request. You weren't trying to hurt me or steal Valentina's place. You were trying to help, in the only way they gave you to help. And while I'm still processing the betrayal, I'm starting to understand the impossible position you were in." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "This ring represents a promise I made to someone who's gone. But maybe it's time to stop living in that past and figure out what the future could look like." I closed the box carefully, the weight of it somehow both heavy and liberating. "What does that mean?" "It means I'd like to take you to dinner. Not as an obligation, not because of security concerns or family pressure. Just as two people who've been through something terrible together and might want to see if there's anything worth building on the other side." His dark eyes held mine, vulnerable in a way I'd only seen during his worst moments of recovery. "I want to know who Lucia Moretti is when she's not pretending to be anyone else. If you're willing to show me." The invitation hung between us, weighted with possibility and risk in equal measure. This was a chance to start over, to build something real from the wreckage of what we'd both lost. But it was also terrifying, exposing myself to someone who'd seen me at my absolute worst and had every reason to never trust me again. "Yes," I said, because the alternative was letting fear make my decisions for the rest of my life. "I'd like that. I'd like to see who we both are when we're not wearing masks." "Saturday? There's a restaurant in Brooklyn. Small place that doesn't cater to the usual crowd. We could just be two people having dinner. Saturday works." He stood, and I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he paused in the doorway. "This won't be easy. I can't promise I've completely forgiven you, or that I won't have moments where the betrayal hits me fresh. But I think we both deserve the chance to figure out if there's something real here, underneath all the lies and trauma. I'll take complicated and real over simple and false any day." A small smile touched his lips. "Good. That's what we've got." The dinners became weekly rituals over the next 3 months. We met at different restaurants, always in neighborhoods where Lorenzo's reputation didn't precede him, places where we could talk without performing for audiences who expected certain behavior from a crime boss and his companion. We talked about everything except the immediate past, giving ourselves space to be people rather than victims of circumstance. Lorenzo told me about his plans to restructure the family business, moving resources toward legitimate enterprises and slowly extracting them from the violent operations that had defined previous generations. It was work that would take years and came with resistance from all sides. But he was committed to honoring what Valentina had asked for, even if she'd never see the results. I told him about returning to school online, taking literature courses again after so many years away from academia, about the satisfaction of translation work, the puzzle of making meaning transfer across languages and cultures, about slowly rebuilding a life that felt like mine rather than something borrowed or stolen. We avoided the minefield of what had happened between us, not out of cowardice, but strategic patience. Some wounds needed time before they could be examined without causing more damage. 3 months into our weekly dinners, Lorenzo picked me up at my apartment with a nervousness I'd never seen in him before. We'd fallen into comfortable patterns by then, easy conversation and careful boundaries. But tonight felt different somehow. The restaurant was one we'd been to before, a quiet Italian place where the owner knew Lorenzo, but didn't make a fuss about his presence. We ordered food we barely tasted, both of us dancing around something neither knew how to say directly. "I've been seeing a therapist," Lorenzo said halfway through the meal, setting down his fork with deliberate care. Anthony suggested it months ago, and I finally took his advice. "Trying to process everything that happened, the coma, the lies, losing Valentina, all of it. How's that going?" "Slowly. Painfully. Productively, I think." He took a sip of wine, organizing his thoughts. "One thing we talk about a lot is the difference between the person I was with Valentina and the person I am now. How trauma changes you in ways you can't undo, and maybe that's not entirely bad." "What do you mean?" "The man who got engaged to your sister was performing a role. The powerful boss, the controlled leader, the person who had everything figured out. I thought that's what she wanted. what everyone wanted, but that person was exhausting to be. And I'm not sure he was particularly real. He looked at me directly. The person I am now, after everything. He's messier, more uncertain, but maybe more honest. I like this version, I said quietly. Messy and uncertain beats polished and fake. That's what I'm hoping. He reached across the table, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. I placed my hand in his, feeling the calluses from his physical therapy and the warmth that still sent electricity through my nervous system. Lucia, I need to ask you something important. My heart rate kicked up. Okay, these last 3 months, getting to know you as yourself rather than as Valentina's echo, it's been the most honest thing in my life. You don't perform for me. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. You just exist as Lucia, with all your complications and flaws and strengths. And he paused, searching for words. It's what I didn't know I needed. Lorenzo, let me finish. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I can't promise I'm completely over what happened. Can't say there won't be moments where I remember the betrayal and feel it fresh. But I'm starting to understand that you were as much a victim of my family's choices as I was. And more importantly, I'm starting to care about who you are separate from all of that. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd be willing to try this for real. Not dinner as friends, not careful conversations where we avoid the past, but an actual relationship where we figure out together what we could be. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I'm asking if you'll be my girlfriend, not my fiancé, not a replacement for someone I lost. Just Lucia, the woman I'm choosing right now, in this moment, with full knowledge of everything we've been through. The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and risk. This was everything I'd been afraid to want, offered freely by someone who had every reason to keep his distance. It was terrifying and perfect, and more than I'd thought I deserved. Yes, I said, and watched relief flood his expression. Yes, I want to try. I want to see what we could build when it's real from the start. He stood and moved to my side of the table, pulling me up and into a kiss that tasted like wine and promises and new beginnings. It was different from that first kiss in the therapy room months ago, that test of recognition and memory. This was acknowledgement. Two people choosing each other with clear eyes and honest intentions. When we pulled apart, both of us were smiling. Not the careful expressions we'd been wearing for months, but genuine joy at taking a risk together. This might be a disaster, I said, resting my forehead against his. Probably. But it'll be our disaster, built on truth instead of lies. I'll take those odds. Our first official date as a couple happened the following weekend. Lorenzo insisted on picking me up properly, bringing more coral flowers, and wearing what he called his attempting to be a normal boyfriend outfit. We went to a movie neither of us could later remember the plot of, too aware of each other's presence to focus on the screen. Afterward, at a diner that served breakfast food 24 hours a day, we ran into Anthony. It wasn't a coincidence, I realized, seeing the way Lorenzo's brother appeared with perfect timing. He'd been informed where we'd be, probably asked to show up as a gesture of family approval. Lucia. Anthony's greeting was formal, but warmer than I'd heard from him before. Good to see you looking well. You too. Thanks for everything. For giving Lorenzo space to figure things out. For not pushing when pushing would have made things worse. He's my brother. Pushing him never works. Anthony settled into the booth across from us, ordering coffee when the waitress appeared. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. He's different with you. More himself. Less the role everyone expects him to play. That's what I'm hoping for both of us, Lorenzo said, his hand finding mine under the table. Room to be ourselves without the weight of other people's expectations. Speaking of expectations, Mother wanted me to pass along that she'd love to have you both for dinner next week. If you're ready for that. Anthony's tone made it clear the choice was truly theirs, no pressure being applied. She's been working on her own recovery, facing what she did and why. I think seeing you two together, happy, would mean a lot to her. Lorenzo looked at me, the question clear in his eyes. What do you think? I think we're strong enough to handle that, I said, surprising myself with the certainty. and I think she deserves to see that something good came from all the mistakes we all made. We went to that dinner the following Thursday. Isabella cried when she saw us arrive together, holding hands, clearly more than just cordial acquaintances. She'd aged in the months since I'd last seen her in person. The stress of nearly losing her son, and then betraying him, carving new lines into her elegant face. But there was also relief there. Gratitude that her family was slowly healing. The meal was easier than I'd expected. We talked about neutral topics at first, gradually working our way toward harder subjects. Isabella apologized again, this time to both of us together, acknowledging the damage her choices had caused. Lorenzo accepted with more grace than I'd thought possible, explaining that forgiveness was a process, but he was working on it. Anthony made dry jokes that cut tension when it threatened to rise too high. By dessert, we were almost relaxed. 4 people who'd been through trauma together, and were tentatively figuring out how to be family again. 6 months after the day Lorenzo had appeared at my apartment with coral flowers, he asked me to be his girlfriend officially during one of our walks through the park near my building. It was a warm evening, the kind where the city felt almost peaceful, and we'd been discussing his latest success in moving a major portion of the family business into legitimate territory. "We're really doing this," he said, not quite a question. "Building something real on ruins of something false. Yes, we're really doing this. It's terrifying. Completely." I squeezed his hand. "But it's also the most honest thing I've ever done. For the first time in my life, someone sees all of me, knows all the worst things I've done, and still chooses to stay. That's worth being terrified for." "Same," he said simply. "You're worth the fear." We weren't a fairy tale. Lorenzo still ran an empire that operated in moral gray areas I tried not to examine too closely. I still carried the weight of months spent living a lie. Guilt that woke me some nights with Valentina's face behind my eyelids. We both had scars that would never fully heal, damage that marked us permanently. But we were real, finally, completely, undeniably real. 2 people who'd been broken by impossible circumstances, and were slowly teaching each other how to be whole again, not by forgetting what had happened, but by choosing to build something new from the pieces that remained. It wasn't the ending either of us had imagined. But standing in that park with Lorenzo's hand in mine, the city lights coming on as evening settled, I realized it was better than anything I'd dared to hope for during those desperate months of deception. We were Lucia and Lorenzo. Not echoes of other people, not performances for audiences who expected certain behaviors. Just ourselves, messy and complicated, and trying our best to be honest in a world that rewarded lies. And somehow, impossibly, that was more than satisfactory. It was everything.